Hey guys, this is Wraith, author of the gay vampire romance Everdark that you are about to listen to, performed by a multi-actor cast. The podcast would not be possible without her Grace Reed studio, which provides the excellent voice talent, and of course, the support of the Wraith Rain members who are subscribers to my site, wraithrain.com, which you will learn about down below and in the podcast. I hope you enjoy how the talented actors bring these vampires and their world of darkness, mystery, and eternal love to life. Now let's get down to it.
Last time on Everdark, Christian awoke to find himself a vampire, but his only thought is to find Julian. Yet, as a newly turned vampire, he cannot exist without his master at his side. We now turn back to Julian, who has made his way into a siren blood den to find a vampire to help Christian. But these vampires may want to kill him. Everdark, Episode 12, Rescue.
Kill me?
Julian repeated the words to make sure that he'd heard Sophia right, but at the same time, he wasn't surprised. He'd wondered if people in the modern age would accept a king.
Why would they want to kill me exactly?
Sophia nodded.
You're the proof.
Of what?
That King Damon actually exists. He's become a myth, you see, to most vampires, and to the ones that know about him being real, he's a threat.
Sophia explained. The world had changed since Damon had been awake. Not just humanity, but perhaps the vampires had moved on too from the idea of kings and queens. Someone had to have filled the power vacuum he'd left. They weren't likely to be willing to give that power up to a king some of them might not even remember or even knew existed.
Because they're ruling things now, and they don't want to step aside?
Julian guessed. She nodded.
But more than that. You see, our whole religion is based upon two things.
Vampires have a religion?
His eyebrows crawled up into his hairline.
Oh, yeah. We even have a religious order which...
She coughed and colored as if embarrassed.
In a spot of originality, we called the order.
Makes it easy to remember.
It does.
She gave him one of those anime schoolgirl grins, then went on.
So, as I was saying, there are two main precepts. First, the immortals made us, and second, we cast them down to be free.
Ah, that's also easy to remember.
And it was, but Damon hadn't mentioned being cast down. A realization hit Julian then.
Damon doesn't know. He has no idea that this happened. This casting down stuff sounds like they were killed.
She nodded.
And simplistic and really not accurate. I mean, the part about them creating us is, but the second part is where things get a little bit more complicated.
When you say that the immortals were cast down, what do you mean exactly? Was Damon supposedly a part of all that?
The tale is that all the immortals were killed, but not King Damon. In fact, those who did the killing claimed to be working in his name, that he had given them the strength to throw off their oppressors and live strong and free as vampires should.
He was already shaking his head as he answered.
Damon had no idea about this. He didn't give any of these vampires any power to do anything of the sort. He was wondering where all the immortals went, and why they didn't come to bring him blood.
As soon as Julian said this, he wondered if he should be telling her these things. It exposed Damon's lack of knowledge and, potentially, his weakness. But he felt that she was trustworthy.
I'm sure that's true, but I wonder if he would have approved of the war anyways. The immortals were destroying everything he had built. My mistress Seer believed that. It was part of the reason why she remained neutral.
Sophia answered. She tilted her head listening for something, but then went on as if whatever she'd heard wasn't an issue.
But remember, what I'm telling you is a story, certainly not the truth.
Got you. What's the real story?
She rolled her eyes and grinned at him.
That would take ages to tell. There are treatises about it. But in a nutshell, King Damon went to sleep to await a day when a mortal would be born that could survive his blood. When that day came, he would awaken and lead us again.
Julian's breathing ceased. Damon was awake now. He'd taken Damon's blood.
And I'm still alive. Maybe he's wrong about me dying. Maybe I'm the one prophesized.
But that seemed insane. He hated vampires. They'd killed his parents. They'd killed his best friend. And they wanted to kill him now. How could he be prophesized to do anything with vampires?
The 10 remaining immortals were to govern the vampire world as a council while he was sleeping and tend to his tomb in Nightfallen.
Sophia continued, doing that headcock listening thing again. Seemingly satisfied by whatever she was hearing, she went on,
But a war started between certain bloodlines. I don't know which one started it. Some say Callie, others say Varen. But regardless, a war between them began and most immortals took one side or the other, some double or even triple crossing each other.
Sounds charming.
My mistress Seer refused to join in, urging peace and warning what would come if they did not stop in this course. But no one listened.
Sophia sighed.
Not a surprise. I guess these immortals are more like the Greek gods.
That's quite true. In any case, the immortals used their fledglings like cannon fodder, sending them in wave after wave against one another. It was a slaughter.
Sophia shivered.
In order to add to their armies, fledglings were made without regard to their ability to accept what they were, or if they would have control not to attack anyone on sight. Forget love and affection. Some of those created were simply insane. It was terrible.
Sophia's shoulders curled inwards. She wrapped her thin arms around herself and hugged her own body. Julian couldn't blame her. Julian guessed that some of his own feelings of betrayal and loss came from just being separated physically from Damon. The fledglings that had just been created to fight and die would have been a mess.
So the cannon fodder decided they would tear down the immortals rather than each other.
Julian guessed. She nodded.
But they didn't stop with just those immortals who had used them. They went after every single one of them.
Including Seer?
He found himself asking softly. She brushed a hand over her silver eyes.
Yes, but the ones that rose against her didn't do so just because they wished to revenge themselves on all immortals. They wanted her gift, so they've imprisoned her.
Where?
I don't know. That's one thing that has always eluded me,
She admitted. After thinking on that for a moment, he pivoted back to something she'd said earlier.
You mentioned that Seer was your mistress. So she made you? Turned you into a vampire?
She nodded.
I was one of the last she turned herself.
But I also take it from how you speak of her that you weren't one of the vampires that wanted her imprisoned.
No, I would never betray her. I care for her deeply. She is my beloved mistress.
Sophia pressed both hands against her chest over her heart.
All who are of her bloodline have stayed true to her. There are just too few of us to make much of a difference. Seer made few fledglings, and her fledglings have made even less.
Why?
Because her gift was too much of a curse. Madness and suicide are common among the seer.
She answered, and he tried to picture this giddy little girl slitting her wrists or walking out into the sunlight to end it all. It was Julian's turn to shiver.
What is her gift?
To see the future.
Sophia gave him a thin smile, and he sensed it was full of sharp-edged memories. He blinked.
You can really do that?
That's how I knew you were coming, and that we'd be friends.
The megawatt smile was back.
So I decided to cut to the chase and act as if we're friends now. Makes things easier, doesn't it? Gets rid of the middleman.
Ah, yeah. That makes some sense, I guess.
He ran a hand through his hair.
Let me back this all up a minute, to why I would be killed if I'd showed Damon's tattoo to the vampires out there.
He pointed to the front of the blood den.
If the vampires believed that Damon gave them the strength or whatever to overthrow the other immortals, wouldn't the majority of vampires be thrilled he's awake? Unless they're the ones in charge. Are they?
Oh, they wish. But no, these are just run-of-the-mill fledglings, turned no more than 200 years ago.
She shrugged, as if a couple of centuries was nothing.
Besides, they're sirens. Not exactly a powerful bloodline. Imagine having to whip up a song to actually get people to do anything for you.
She rolled her eyes.
It's really the poor version of the Eyros bloodline. Not that anyone ever really says that to their faces.
But you're here, hanging with them.
Julian pointed out.
Or is that because you foresaw me coming here?
Yes and no. Seers are welcome to live with every bloodline because of our gift. Knowing what's coming is a powerful tool.
She explained.
And since we no longer have a home of our own, we have to make do.
Why don't the people who have Seer in prison imprison you too?
Some of us do despair, but being able to see the future, well, it keeps most of us out of trouble.
Julian felt like his head was spinning from all the information she was giving him. He poked at Damon again, but still was hearing nothing from the Vampire King. Damon probably would make sense of all this faster than he was.
So you foresaw me coming, but Seer wasn't able to stop herself from being kidnapped?
He asked, slightly skeptically.
You have to understand that being kidnapped and imprisoned was the only way she foresaw that what is happening now and in the future will happen the way she wants, the way it should be.
And that is?
He prompted, feeling he was missing something.
You being born and Damon waking up and kicking some ass.
She nodded sagely.
Me being born?
His eyebrows lifted. She tilted her head to the side.
You don't know? He doesn't know? He must be weak if he didn't recognize you.
Who didn't recognize me?
Julian had a feeling he knew what she meant, but he had to have her say it. He needed to hear someone else believe he wasn't going to die.
You're the human strong enough to survive his blood. Well, you're not human any longer. You're a vampire now.
He felt a wave of gratefulness sweep through him.
You're sure I'm going to survive?
You're right here, perfectly fine.
She pointed out, giving him a strange look.
Yeah, but Damon thinks I'll die soon.
Technically, you're already dead. Second life and all that.
She shook her head.
I do not want to gainsay our king, but I think he may simply fear that you will die a second time rather than actually know it.
Julian really hoped that she was right.
Obviously, that's my hope too.
You seem strong and healthy, if a little peaky from being hungry. He's not with you, I take it? He's in Nightfallen.
Again, he wondered if he should tell this strange vampire the truth, but he sensed he should. So he simply nodded.
He's going to stay there for a while to get things sorted.
He must be really weak after not feeding. I imagine he can't make the journey between planes.
You didn't foresee that, did you?
She laughed.
Oh, no. I don't see everything that's coming. Just some crucial things, like what's coming next.
Julian froze.
What's coming next?
Well, we're about to get attacked.
She told him, eyes nearly slits as she smiled broadly.
What?
Julian went to the door, but she waved him away.
Why did you bring us into a room with only one exit if you knew we were going to be attacked? And why are they going to attack us? You stopped me from showing the tattoo.
Don't worry, Julian. Everything is going to be just fine. We're safe in here for now. When that changes, I'll move us.
She grasped his arm and drew him away from the door. Somehow, he believed her and mirrored her calm.
As to how they know you're, well, not like us. First, there's the issue about your eyes.
My eyes?
Julian blinked in self-consciousness as she rose up on her tiptoes to look into them.
They aren't silver. They're this beautiful shade of purple,
she said. Arms crossed behind her back and swayed from side to side. This was yet another movement he'd seen only in animes, yet it seemed as natural as breathing when she did it.
Damon's are red. Maybe that's why mine are different.
He almost reached up to touch his eyes as if he could feel the color.
You haven't looked at yourself yet. Well, you're quite down to earth then.
She laughed.
Even though you're quite lovely.
I had bigger things on my mind. I guess I should be glad my eyes aren't blood red like Damon's. That would have caused an issue with some of the humans I met tonight.
He answered, feeling slightly relieved that he didn't look quite so alien as Damon did.
Beautiful, but not human.
Well, others certainly noticed you and those eyes of yours. So they decided to check out my story about the charm.
She explained with a twirl of her hands in the air.
I'm a guest of the sirens, which is why I have a charm to come and go from their properties. But they aren't given out like candy.
I would imagine not.
Julian felt a little faint.
To get one, I would have needed the vampire lord whose house I'm residing in to have granted me one. They must have found out he didn't, and someone just checked the security feed and saw your tattoo. Then they called the order.
Sophia seemed excited as she told him this, as if she were relaying the plot of a movie rather than their current circumstances.
What's a shame is that the order would have likely killed all the sirens here tonight because they, too, might have noticed you.
Kill them?
Would have, but they won't get a chance because Balthazar is coming.
A dreamy smile crossed her lips. He froze.
Balthazar?
Balthazar was coming here? The vampire who had sent the 2 vampires after him and Christian? The vampire that might have Christian?
Yes.
She seemed so happy that he was stunned for a moment.
Damon, I really need your help. Are you there? Can you hear me?
Nothing.
Not only are the Everdark actors incredibly talented at what they do, they're also fascinating people. I hope you're getting to know them as well as me in our mini Q&As every week. If you tend to skip those, go back and take a listen. Sometimes we talk about the episode you just heard and get a little more into lore or characters. Other times it's about the craft of voice acting, vampires in general, fantasy and games, or just life. These interludes are only about 5 to 8 minutes long, and if you have thoughts of your own about what we're talking about, we want to hear them. Come to the YouTube version of the episode and leave a comment. The voice actors are also keen to know your thoughts and are watching the comments as well.
He dug his fingernails into his palms. That was when he heard the shouting. The crowd in the blood den had been noisy before, but now there was a wave of sound that was different than before. This time, when he went to the door, Sophia did not stop him, but followed closely after him instead. He cracked the door open and saw the 2 vampires. Ones he didn't recognize in what looked like monks' robes were frozen in mid-step coming down the hallway. Their heads, though, were turned towards the front door. It appeared that everyone was looking in that direction, though he couldn't see why.
The order came to kill you,
Sophia whispered. She had ducked her head beneath his arms and was looking out of the cracked door with him.
Just steps away, but they might as well be miles.
I thought you were going to warn me when we were in danger.
He pointed out to her.
Like you said, they're just steps away.
We aren't in danger. Balthazar is here, see?
She pointed out down the hall towards the door. Julian craned his head. 2 of the vampires parted, and he could indeed see a very handsome man striding just inside the door, flanked by another vampire in monk's robes. He was as big as a berserker, and on the other side...
Christian!
Julian nearly lunged through the door, but Sophia's hand was on his wrist again, and she tugged him back with surprising strength.
No, Julian, not yet. Wait for Balthazar to get things taken care of,
she warned.
But Christian...
He's fine. His eyes are silver, Julian. Balthazar turned him. He's safe.
She petted his arm. He hadn't told her about Christian yet, but she knew. Yet his lips writhed back from his teeth, and he felt his incisors elongate, not in anger at her, but in fear for Christian.
You don't understand. Balthazar!
He isn't your enemy.
Her silver eyes stared into his.
Whatever you're thinking is wrong. Let Balthazar take care of this.
At that moment, a voice rose up from one of the vampires in the blood den.
Balthazar, what are you doing here?
And how did you get in? We don't allow Eyros trash in here.
Another voice rose up.
Especially exiled Eyros trash.
There were some angry snarls from other sirens. Balthazar, in his sleek suit that made the other men in the room look like bumpkins somehow, just smiled slowly like a cat fed on plenty of fatty cream. I was invited, Balthazar drawled, as he then reached behind him and brought forward a young man that looked almost dazed, as if he were half asleep. Balthazar pushed him towards the other vampires. The angry snarls from before grew even angrier. Fangs were suddenly extended. Fingers were ripping at the air like claws. The sense that every vampire in the room was about to launch themselves at Balthazar, not to mention Christian, was evident.
What is he doing?
Julian hissed, his fingers digging into the wood of the doorframe.
He's egging them on.
Don't worry.
Sophia touched his arm, and he found it comforting and familiar somehow.
Balthazar might only be a little over 2 centuries old, but there's a reason he was able to defeat his own master. People whisper that he's Eyros born. Watch what he does, and you'll understand why even vampires fear the Eyros.
Julian found himself looking back to see what Balthazar would do. His gaze also latched onto Christian. His best friend appeared very well, not sick, nor hurt, nor weak. Christian had his game face on. He appeared completely unconcerned, as dozens of angry vampires hissed and spat at him.
"There are 2 Order confessors here."
It was the big berserker man who spoke. His silver eyes unerringly found the 2 similarly robed figures at the mouth of the hallway. They both straightened. One of them, a woman with such pale blonde hair that it looked almost white, stepped forward and addressed him.
We were invited, Confessor Arceus Kane.
"Unlike you and the other exiles."
The second robed figure pointed out acidly. He was also a big man, so heavily muscled that not even the shapeless robes could hide his figure.
"Whoever called you in would not have done so if they'd had understood who you're really interested in and why."
Arceus answered evenly. "And I wonder what you intended to do to them." Balthazar tilted his head towards the crowd. "They've seen what you want hidden. You wouldn't take the chance of them telling anyone about your visit tonight. Or worse, figuring out."
Silence!
The female confessor shouted.
You are an exile and an unbeliever. You have no say in Order business or vampire business.
"Now that's just petty." Balthazar's eyes narrowed.
If any of them move or interfere, you are sanctioned from the preceptor himself to kill them.
The female confessor said to the crowd, and turned back towards where Julian and Sophia were still peeking out of the door. Julian would have jerked back, but Sophia put a hand out and pushed the door all the way open.
It's safe for us to go now, Julian,
she told him, which was insane. They were in more danger than ever, but she stepped out of the room into the hallway, looking tiny and waif-like, and she was unafraid. Julian wasn't going to hang back like a frightened child when Sophia was out there. She could tell the future after all. But more importantly, he wouldn't have her fight his battles. So he stepped out too. That's when Christian saw him.
Julian!
Christian made the same move to lunge towards him as Julian had. But just as Sophia had stopped Julian, Balthazar held Christian back.
Balthazar, let me go! Julian!
"We have this," Balthazar said.
Then do something!
Christian cried. At that, Christian grasped Balthazar's lapels and looked up at him rather desperately. The look that crossed Balthazar's face was not unusual. The very few times that Christian had leveled that "help me" gaze at someone, they invariably did what he asked. It was almost a dopey look. But then Balthazar was smiling, as if someone had given him the absolute best present ever. He patted Christian's hands, which immediately had Christian withdrawing those clutching hands and looking momentarily affronted, as if he had no idea how they'd gotten there. Balthazar did not appear to be in the least deterred. "I'm working up to it, Christian. Don't worry." He then turned to the berserker. "Arceus, deal with your fellow religious people."
"Religious people?"
Arceus raised a thick eyebrow. "Don't get touchy. Go save Julian, please," Balthazar said.
Do not do this, Arceus!
The female confessor cried. "Really, dear, someone should have been warning you." Balthazar gave a razor-sharp smile. The female confessor appeared unimpressed and addressed the siren again.
If the exiles move, not only do you have sanction to kill them, there will be a reward and recognition by the preceptor for doing so.
There was now an eager note in the snarls that started up again. The male confessor had already turned back towards Sophia and Julian. Julian stepped in front of the much smaller vampire. She reached for his hand, and he thought it was because she was scared, but instead she raised his right arm up and drew down the sleeve of his coat to expose the infinity tattoo.
This is what the confessors are here for. They don't want you to know the truth.
She called out, her voice clear like a clarion.
King Damon has returned. Look at his mark. His true fledgling has been turned.
The sirens turned almost at one at her words. Julian grimaced as it felt like the tattoo was burning. There were gasps, claims that it couldn't be real, shouts that it was a hoax. Others actually fell to their knees, silent with hands covering their mouths. In comparison, the male confessor actually let out a snarl of disgust and hatred. His eyes glowed hot silver, and he leaped towards Julian and Sophia. All hell seemed to break loose in the blood den too. There were cries and screams and snarls. Julian's newfound powers seemed to desert him, and all he managed to do was cringe down as the barreling confessor charged. Stop. One word from Balthazar. One simple word. And everything stopped. Everyone stopped. The air seemed to tingle like electricity ran through it. Sophia managed to somehow let his arm go, though he still had it raised, and caught the male confessor by the throat. She held him there effortlessly while Julian just goggled. Other than Sophia, himself, and Balthazar's group, every vampire in the place was just frozen, in the exact stance with the exact expression they'd had when Balthazar had spoken that one word.
Julian!
Christian's voice rang out as his best friend leaped over the vampires in his way until he was throwing his arms around Julian.
Oh, thank God, Christian. You're all right. You're all right.
Julian held on to his best friend like his own life depended upon it. He buried his face against Christian's shoulder. Since this whole ordeal had begun less than 24 hours ago, he felt he had lived a lifetime.
I thought, God, I don't know what I thought. I'm all right, Julian. Balthazar explained that everything about what Celine and Heath did, those were the vampires that attacked us in the city, wasn't on his orders. I believe him, though he's a little different.
Christian colored slightly at the end and looked away, then shook his head. Julian pulled back to look at the continued frozen vampires. Sophia had put down the male confessor. He laid on the floor like a leaping statue. She wended her way towards Balthazar and Arceus.
I'll say, are you seeing this, Christian?
Julian asked, gesturing towards the frozen vampires.
How is he doing this?
With great difficulty. Balthazar laughed, but he did look a little strained. I can't keep it up forever. Arceus, Ridley, I'll need your help with them. Christian, why don't you and Julian go out to the car? Oh, hello. Balthazar said the last to Sophia, who had stopped in front of him and was smiling at him with those wide anime eyes. Her hands were crossed behind her back again, and she was doing that swaying back and forth thing.
Lord Balthazar, I'm Sophia Strange,
she said winningly. Yes. Yes, of course. The seer. Balthazar tilted his head to the side. He had this very uncertain expression on his face, as if he were looking at an alien life form.
And now the newest member of your household.
Her smile got wider, which Julian didn't think was possible. What? Balthazar asked, boggling. A smile tugged at Arceus's lips.
It would be quite a coup. Make us seem legitimate to have a seer in House Ravenscroft.
I think people just say that because they're hoping to get rid of the seer they have. Make you take them on, Balthazar said. He turned back to her, but she didn't look at all offended by what he'd said.
She helped me,
Julian found himself saying.
She saved me. If she hadn't stepped in, I don't know what would have happened.
You would have been killed,
Sophia said helpfully.
Yeah, probably that.
Julian scrubbed one hand across the back of his neck while holding on to Christian with the other.
If she saved Julian, then she's okay in my book. We can't leave her here in any event.
Christian said. A mulish expression crossed his pretty face.
Wouldn't you like to know what's going to happen in your future, Lord Balthazar?
Sophia's voice was soft and sweet, but there was a sense of her ancientness. Balthazar's eyebrows rose. She leaned towards him, one foot popping up while she lowered her voice even further.
Don't you want to know about your upcoming greatness?
Now Balthazar was looking interested. He opened his mouth, but Sophia was already kissing his cheek.
Oh, I am so glad to be part of your household, Lord Balthazar. And I need to thank you in advance for the beautiful new furnishings that you'll be buying for my room to make it a true home for me. I'll just go and wait for everyone in the car.
She practically skipped out of the blood den. Balthazar watched her go, mouth parted, eyes wide, as if he wasn't sure what had just happened. He turned back to them and shook his head. What?
Since she sees the future, she figures why bother waiting for things to actually happen. Cuts out the middleman that way.
Julian explained to Christian and Balthazar. Right. That's different. Julian and his best friend made their way past the frozen vampires to Balthazar. Julian felt strange looking at the man he'd thought had tried to kill them and, perhaps, his parents. But he felt no animosity towards him. His instincts, and maybe those really were Damon since he couldn't hear the Vampire King, were telling him that both Sophia and Christian were right. This man was not a threat, but was he an ally? Balthazar's gaze was lingering on Christian, who was just as clearly ignoring him. Something was going on there that Julian would find out about, but he finally looked over at Julian. He gave a smile that was reflected in his silver eyes. Julian felt almost at ease, but he reminded himself that this man was holding all these vampires in place. May I, Julian? He extended a hand towards Julian's right one, where the tattoo was now covered up with the jacket. I just want to see what the fuss is all about, Balthazar said and waggled his fingers. A teenage girl with short, dark hair who must have been the Ridley that Balthazar had mentioned before drifted over. Arceus, too, was suddenly right there. All of them were staring at Julian's covered wrist. Julian tugged it closer to his body. Christian was suddenly standing in front of him.
He's not an exhibit.
Christian growled, and he actually showed a little fang. Seeing Christian so defensive of him, had Julian stepping forward and pushing his jacket up to reveal the tattoo, which looked a dark purple now.
Here,
Julian said. Balthazar's reaction was interesting. He touched the tattoo lightly with his thumb, then drew back as if it burned him. It doesn't mean anything, Arceus, Balthazar growled to the confessor, who had said nothing. Julian glanced at Arceus. He, too, was staring at the tattoo, clutching this elaborate gold and ruby necklace around his neck.
It means everything,
Arceus whispered. Ridley blinked and looked between the two other vampires.
Is that... When he says Damon, does he mean King Damon?
Julian cut in.
Damon's real. If you just wait long enough, he'll be coming to Earth to prove it to you.
He will be coming here?
Arceus looked starstruck.
Yes.
Why isn't he here now? Why would he leave you alone? You're barely a day old and you're starving. Balthazar sounded outraged.
It's not his fault. He woke up after not being fed for too long. He doesn't have the strength to come here yet, but he will.
Yet he sent you here alone.
Because of Christian. Christian would have died if I hadn't left Nightvallen.
Julian cried out, and Christian stroked his back.
I'm all right.
Christian murmured. Julian nodded. He was so tired. He wanted to lay down and not get up for a while.
He's no well.
I'm just a little tired. Or maybe I'm finally dying from Damon's blood.
Balthazar put a hand against Julian's forehead as if checking for a fever. You're hungry. You haven't fed. You need to get out of here.
Balthazar was going to say your master, but Damon's not here. And the Vampire King doesn't seem to want me in Nightvallen. He's not asked me to come back.
Julian tried not to feel depressed about this. Now that he'd seen Christian was safe, his own situation loomed large ahead of him.
Everything will be okay, Julian. Balthazar will make sure that you're safe.
Christian said with such certainty that Julian wondered if he had Sophia's gift of seeing the future. But the moment that Christian said it, Balthazar was agreeing with him, and Julian wondered if there was a method to this madness.
Once word gets out about what you did here tonight, I'm sure that no one will bother me again,
Julian said. Balthazar and Arceus's gaze met. The vampire lord explained, No one will know about tonight outside of our household, Julian. They won't remember you coming here. They won't remember the tattoo. They won't remember a thing. Julian frowned.
But,
Julian, trust me. Balthazar's silver eyes glittered. This is best. You and Christian need to be ghosts. That's the only way I can keep you safe. Join us next time for episode 13, The Boss.
Many people have asked us if there are ebooks of the Everdark series. Yes, now there are ebooks, as well as Everdark merch. Ebooks are available in PDF, EPUB, and Mobi from our own merch shop. Just follow the link in the note to the Everdark series to read on your phone or any device. And check out the t-shirts, mugs, art prints, and pop sockets while you're at it. Your support really matters to us as small creators, and any purchases go directly to supporting the creation of more stories, just like Everdark and Dragon's Reign. Thanks, you guys.
The Everdark podcast by Ex Aratare is performed by Edward Fox, Adam Riley, Jay Thillis, Bruno Devant, Kelly Michaels, and Hannah Hart. Edited by Matthew Prince, continuity by Adrielle Wiggins. Everdark is produced by Wraith Rain Publishing in association with Her Grace Reed Studios. Copyright 2022 by Wraith Rain Publishing.